We're recording, Clodagh said.
Yes.
So go on, quickly say what you need to say.
I was going to say you could be hitting that age when you start to shrink a bit.
You're very lucky we're on air now that you said that then. I happened to be bending forward because I couldn't see what was on my iPad.
Yeah.
And then I sat bolt upright and Clodagh said, yeah, no, you're a normal height.
Yeah.
I looked like I was from the Shire when I was bent forward.
Yeah.
Now, the High Court challenge made by Noah Massini and David Amat. Now, these two teenagers are charged in connection with the killing of Tristan Sherry in the restaurant last Christmas Eve. We'll go back around the details of that in a minute. But basically, they were 17 when that offence happened.
Yeah.
They were to be tried as minors, basically.
Yeah, so they
were with the way the law works in Ireland, they were to be sentenced as adults because by the time sentencing comes, if they're found guilty, they would be over 18. So they've taken a challenge against this.
Well, see, so there's two bits of it. They were charged as juveniles.
Yeah.
The offence occurred when they were juveniles. So I think one of them aged out, as they call it, shortly after being charged. And at one stage we were saying a teenager has been charged. And then we were able to say the name of him, the name of the accused, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a bit unclear, but really what it is at the moment is if you were a juvenile when offence is committed and you were charged as a juvenile, once you hit 18 and you're in a court, then you can automatically be named. Now, there's been a number of court cases about this over the years where people have said, well, because I committed the offence as a juvenile, it shouldn't automatic. I should remain anonymous until forever, really, because it's committed as a juvenile. So these two guys have brought this case. Now, the judge says...
Is theirs around their anonymity, which is already, the horse is bolted anyway?
But the horse is bolted with the anonymity. But what this is to do with the sentencing, if they were found guilty. And the judge says at the moment they have a presumption of innocence, obviously, but they've brought this case and that shouldn't be suggest any culpability. But what's changed now is, obviously, as we've spoken about many times, if you're convicted of murder, which both of these guys are charged with, you receive an automatic life sentence once you're over 18. However, if you commit a murder as a juvenile, that does not stand. And instead, the judge can give a determinate sentence, as in a number of years. For example... Any
amount or over a certain amount?
No, I think there is... I don't know if there's a minimum, but the judge can give a determinate sentence. So you will see, I think the judge can also give a life sentence, but they can also give a sentence, something like 14 years. We've seen cases of that type. If the judge gives a determinate sentence, you can also... under the juvenile sentencing provisions, you can get routine reviews of the sentence. So it's just a different thing. They just wouldn't automatically get that life sentence.
But up to this point, you still have to be under the age of 18 at the time of sentencing to get that those sort of, I suppose, lesser sentencing. Yeah, it's a lesser sentencing regime for a minor.
Exactly.
Whereas if they change in age, which they will, because it takes quite a while for these court cases to come up, unless somebody is like 12, 13, 14, they're unlikely to be still under that age bracket by the time they are before the courts, if they're found guilty by the time of the sentencing. So they're challenging this. That must have been... Was that ever challenged before, or has it just never come up before?
Well, it's never been successful before. And I mean, we have seen cases actually of people who are approaching 18 and are pleading guilty as juveniles in order to benefit from a different sentencing regime. There have been challenges on various bits of this legislation, but this is certainly a big challenge. And although it was successful, the judge said that it did not comply with the guarantee of equality, and he said there was no objective justification for differing sentencing regimes based on ageing out, as they call it. So
that's the what you mentioned didn't comply with the guarantee of equality. That's under Article 40 of the Constitution.
Yeah.
So do we need to change the laws in this case?
Well, this is what we're getting into. So the challenge has been successful, and the judge now he's got to hear submissions before finalising it, basically. So they've been successful on that point. What happens next is actually far more complicated, because the defence barristers have called for their trials to be halted until new laws can be brought in by the Oireachtas, which again would be a huge ordeal, as we all know. I mean, a law from start to finish, even when they're rushed through, takes a huge amount of time. And something like this, which is particularly complex and, would want submissions from all over the place. So at the moment, the legislation just doesn't exist there, I think, to take in this point of law. So the judge is going to come back and obviously make a determination, but he's looking for submissions, as you've seen in court cases. Presumably the government itself would make submissions in this case. But yeah, it's certainly a big deal. The lawyers have said, described it as this idea that if you commit crimes as a juvenile but can be sentenced as an adult, they described it as arbitrary, capricious and irrational, and that there's a recognition from the court that on the principles under the Children's Act, which they distinctly make a difference between an offence committed by a juvenile and an offence committed by an adult in terms of sentencing, that they weren't being recognised in this case. And it is kind of arbitrary, really, if you think about it. But it's been an issue of controversy the world over, really, hasn't it? In how children are dealt with in the criminal justice system.
And just to say, before we're inundated with comments, Musaini, who's 18 of Corduff Park and Blanchardstown, and Ama, who's also 18 of Hazel Grove, Portrain Road, Donabate, they've been charged with Sherry's murder and sent forward before the non-jury special criminal court. Their lawyers are employed to defend and represent them in every way they possibly can. Yeah. And they have a presumption of innocence, as the judge said. Their lawyers, it probably is unlikely them that are directing exactly this or have a full understanding of the Irish Constitution. Yeah. But it is the lawyer's job, when employed to defend anyone, be they a minor or anybody, to do their very best for them. And they have a right to any defence and to any judicial reviews and everything else the lawyer should see fit for them to take.
Absolutely. And I mean, it is a complex area of the law. I mean, this is a worldwide case in how to deal with juveniles. We had an Irish chef, Sean Brady, shot dead in Kansas City, and a juvenile is charged with his murder. And even in that part of the US, he couldn't be named because he's under 18, even in the US, which we always regard as a bit of the Wild West, because there have been huge issues across the US where we've had children sentenced as adults. Even there's been children who are adults now who've been put to death, executed for crimes they committed as children. And then obviously there's the really high profile cases in the UK as well.
And all that sort of changed. I mean, it's not that long ago. It's within our lifetimes that children under the age of 16 even would have been put into adult prisons with adult convicts. It's never seen as a good way of administering justice, because your hope is obviously if somebody commits a crime at such a young age that they will rehabilitate.
Yeah, and there is a distinction is made in under the Children's Act, as the judge said, that there has to be, children are not treated the exact same, as having the same degree of culpability as a grown adult, who should have a better distinction between right and wrong and have that experience of being an adult to call upon.
So going back to Christmas Eve in that restaurant in Blanchardstown, these two teenagers, the state say, are just two of a number of people that were caught up in this savagery, really, that happened out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's still ongoing. What happened in West Dublin obviously made, when there was a guy, Tristan Sherry, came into a family restaurant on Christmas Eve and shot dead, ultimately Jason Hennessy Snr. It sparked a reaction, and ultimately Tristan Sherry was disarmed and was killed. It led to great fears of further attacks and that there'd be further reprisals. There have been a lot of incidents, really. I mean, most recently in August, the son of Jason Hennessy Snr, Devin Hennessy, was driving his car through West Dublin, and gunmen approached him on a motorbike and shots were fired at the car. Nobody was injured. Devin Hennessy At the time, it was reported had not made a statement or spoken to Gardaí about the event, but it does seem that his life at least was partly saved by the fact he was driving a bulletproof BMW and bullet resistant, I suppose.
Yeah, no, nothing's bulletproof. Not even those big doors or the windows. They're bullet resistant. They kind of
and it does seem that car may have been bought from members of the Dundon McCarthy gang.
Is it the same car that's been knocking around since then?
Well, I don't know if it is the same car actually, because
there's a few of those BMWs. I actually, believe it or not, was offered one at one stage, right? Not that I needed it, but I was offered one of these bullet resistant BMWs. But the interesting thing about them is they've been sort of, if you take a normal BMW and, they're pretty big cars with big engines, they actually drive very well though.
Yeah.
I do drive one of them myself, and it's expensive to fill the tanks, but they go and go. They're quite efficient, fuel efficient. But the problem is when you bullet resistant them or bulletproof them, it's like putting a big heavy steel coat on top of your car.
Right.
And you could literally drag a sort of a forecourt behind you, the amount of diesel or petrol you need in them. So most normal people can't afford to keep them going.
And they're not considering how bad it is for the environment.
Well, I was going to say that. I'm sure they're horrendous for the environment. But it's interesting you should say that, because there was only a couple of those cars knocking around.
Yeah.
And one of them was in the hands of the Dundon McCarthys. Was it not seized by the Criminal Assets Bureau?
It was.
And sold back into the market somehow?
I'm not fully sure exactly how this one has come about, but they have been gone around. They've been.
But I'm sure you can get them done. Like, you know what I mean? It's not just that they exist and they just float around between people. I'm sure if you have a car, you can have it, coated in whatever it is.
Exactly, whatever. Bulletproof
whatever
stuff,
it is,
wherever you go,
and wherever they do that. Yeah,
I mean these
Must
things.
Look that up.
Yeah, I mean there have like a certain amount of these things go around. I think like bulletproof vests, for example, are being sold on online. I think they were actually illegal to buy at one stage, but I'm not sure that they are
illegal to buy.
Well, there were certainly restrictions on them at one stage, but I think they're fully legal to sell now in Ireland. But
I bet you can get one of them on Amazon.
You can actually, you can.
Delivered to you with your Prime.
Whether you put your life on it, I don't know. But so there's been ongoing incidents, and we reported, Patrick O'Connell reported for the Sunday World about one of these incidents that are continued to go on in West Dublin that maybe aren't fully making the headlines some of the time. We had CCTV image of what's described as a juvenile again, 6 days after the attempted attack on Devin Hennessy. There was CCTV of a juvenile basically trying to petrol bomb a car outside a home. He's sort of unsuccessful, inexperienced, manages to sort of half light himself on fire. And this is just one of the number of things that are ongoing. It's still very,
in the Blanchardstown area. It sounds very familiar to what's been happening in the Finglas area, the sort of the feuds, those tit for tat incidents been happening between the flashy and anti-flashy mobs out there.
Exactly, and there's these young guys.
Very expensive to police.
Very expensive to police. Very difficult to police in an area like Blanchardstown, which is smack bang in the centre of North Dublin, which so many areas around it, so much through traffic generally anyway. The guards have done a particularly good job because tensions have remained very, very high. There was further raids. There was a number of ammunition seized. Again, that was looking into two of the gangs that are involved in this ongoing feud. The reality is that there's some very heavy and serious criminals connected to both sides of this dispute, even in regards to the weapon that was used in Brown's Steakhouse, which has yet to be found. It was believed to be one of these assault rifles used in the feud, which just shows you the level of weaponry involved.
And available. Now, the actual investigation into both those murders has been ongoing, and there's been quite a lot of people, I think up to 8 people before the courts in connection with it, who remain in custody. Awaiting their trials, but still there's obviously enough people outside and associated with those 2 individuals that were killed and who are, in this, it's like a cycle of bloody feuding, isn't it, that starts?
It is a cycle of feuding, and we had a big debate over on Saturday whether this is the court of feud or not, because there's all sorts of people who are involved in that court.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there was what was called the court of feud, which was, there was obviously a number of not to get into it, a number of attacks, number of very serious incidents in it. Now, a number of these people who are suspected of being involved in this dispute that led to the shooting of Jason Hennessy Snr are also... some of those people were also involved in this court of feud. However, this is a slightly different feud.
Isn't that classic as well? Because you often see that with those sort of chaotic feuds that are happening within a small area, that these sub-feuds break out, if you'd call them that. And they're not quite in the it's not quite as clear.
No, it's...
And people are fluidly moving from one side to the other.
Exactly. And also there's that, the flashy feud, as you described it. Some of those people are also mixed in with this. Tristan Sherry in particular was an associate of Mr. Flashy. However, this is not part of that flashy feud. So you have these people circulating through a number of feuds. Yeah. And there's obviously then, these bad blood between, so criminals are associating with people, an enemy of my enemy is my friend. So obviously the Tristan Sherry did not drive to that restaurant on his own. He was accompanied by other people. Those people have yet to be arrested. And so the guards have done a really good job in this case. But I
think what's reflected through the courts and what we started with this High Court challenge by Musaini and Amma about their ages and how they should be sentenced should they be found guilty is reflective of the fact that this feud almost stands out by the youth of those involved in it and those who've been picked up in relation to it. I can't recall any other situation that there's been so many so young brought before the courts.
Yeah.
And I can't recall, not open to correction here, but I cannot recall before a 17-year-old be brought before the Special Criminal Court in relation to gangland activity.
No, I don't think there has been. I mean, there may have been back in the day some Republican people that were juveniles, but certainly in terms of gangland crime, I don't think there is. And yet there have been a lot of young people picked up. There's obviously young people charged. They have not, they've the presumption of innocence, have not pled guilty. However, you can see that this is something that involves very, very young people, and it is a very. It's a very concerning situation, I think, and I think it's probably one of the number one priority areas for Gardaí in this city. Alongside that, there's other issues going on in the Crumlin, Drimnagh area, also involving young people, a series of incidents. So it's very hard for the Gardaí. I mean, we all know with these the cutbacks, the lack of the amount of Gardaí leaving, the pressures on sort of antisocial behaviour, they do have their jobs cut out for them. And I think you've seen, obviously we've spoken about the programme before, Inside the K, and was the follow-up called The Guards, was it? It was rechanged. You can see that's obviously was based in that general area, and you can see what they're having to deal with. It is a really genuine challenge,
It is, but the only thing about it, I think, is that we've shown again and again, it is policeable.
Yeah.
It very much is policeable with the resources.
You
just have to flood the place.
Yeah.
And dismantle the gangs, and then, of course,
Yeah, and you have to have...
come up, the usual, but still.
Yeah, and have the intelligence officers and the people on the ground that have those connections. But you saw, I think that programme was a great programme, because you see the guards on that genuine front line. You saw... what they're facing and, what skill it does take.
No money. People always say that to me about my job, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, right, we'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.